Afternoon and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. We'll let everybody else join in. I'll get my screen share started. Just sit tight and we will get started here momentarily. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kelsey Scott. I'm the Director of Programs for the Farm Service Agency. Happy to be joined today by our friends at the Farm Service Agency. We have Jamie White, Seth Cross, and Acting Deputy Administrator of Farm Programs, John Burge, joining in. I'm going to go ahead and without further ado, get us kicked off, but want to thank you all for joining in today. If you have registered for this, you will receive a link to the recording, but please do use the chat and Q&A feature to ask any questions as they arise, and we'll make sure to get them addressed throughout today's conversation. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Deputy Administrator Burge.
Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you for your kind note the other day. I really appreciated that. It was my, I think, third week in this job, so it's nice to hear good things as well as the bad. Sadly, I am double booked, so I'm not going to be able to stay with you long, but you have really the right team on here to answer any of the specific questions about what it is that we're both doing and what it is that we've done as it relates to disaster recovery. It's been a heck of a couple of years, as you all know, as the folks that are on this call know, whether it is drought or whether it is wildfire or whether it is these unbelievable snowstorms that we've experienced. There's been a lot happening in this space, and Seth Cross should be commended in front of all of you for the work that he's been doing in order to make these programs more accessible and more responsive to the disasters that we're facing now. Jamie White, who is also on, I know you all are familiar with her work too, but I should commend her as well because we've had some real trying times and some real increased flexibilities. The administrator and the secretary have asked us to lean in on those things and see if we can get to be more responsive to the needs that are out there. Just yesterday, we issued our notice on ELAP. There is an enhancement to that notice as well that I think is going to be discussed. We're working on some LIP enhancements now. I know that there's constant interest in LFP in ELAP from another perspective too. So I know that there's going to be a lot of good questions. And I would invite you, Kelsey, and the rest of the IAC team, as you see gaps, please communicate with me, as you did the other day. I want that to be an open line. Work with these folks, but work with me also to see if we can help, make that bottleneck a little bit wider. In any event, I really do appreciate your time. Jamie, I think I'll kick it to you, or Kelsey, if you'd like to kick it to Jamie and Seth, and they can get going. And sadly, I've got to drop because I've got to go to another call. This one would be much more fun than the one I'm about to join. So I appreciate you having me and inviting me to join just real briefly.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate your time and your advocacy for our producers.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
All right, we will pass it over to Seth and Jamie to go ahead and get us underway. I will advance the slides when you tell me to.
Well, thank you, Kelsey. And I don't know if Jamie is going to hop on to say anything. So I'll give her the opportunity if she wanted to speak before I get going with the training. But I do want to say thank you for everyone for joining today. Obviously, if you do have questions, please put them into the chat and we'll try to answer them as best that we can. You know, if there is something we're unable to answer, or if it needs to be something very specific, we can obviously get back to you on that. But I see Jamie is on, so I will let her go ahead and speak with you as well.
Apologies, Seth. I was having a little bit of technical difficulty, hoping you all can hear me now. We certainly don't want to delay the important discussion that we're going to have here, and Seth really is the man of the hour and is going to provide you all with the best information, getting down into the details as part of our disaster recovery and response. And again, just to amplify what Mr. Burge had already shared, we've had a lot of opportunity to explore flexibilities and enhancements to support disaster recovery, specifically recovery for those of you who are impacted in the livestock industry. We know there are widespread losses, not only because of the blizzards, but truly because of the ongoing drought. It doesn't take us too long to look at the drought monitor to see that there is widespread drought intensity that is out there as well. And I know Seth is also going to highlight that. I did just want to identify and flag, and Seth had mentioned we'll certainly answer questions, not only in the chat, but after the call. But every time we have an opportunity to engage with producers on the ground, we have an opportunity to listen and learn and identify maybe potential impediments to our program policy or even our program delivery. And I do just want to emphasize that our county office staff continue to do the absolute best that they can with the information that they have available. And as John alluded to, we've explored significant flexibilities, and we've really done a great job strategically identifying solutions for potential areas of need, but that hasn't always necessarily allowed us an opportunity to get that information in writing and communicate that to the county office staff as quickly as we would like to have done so. So that is also something that we are going to aim to do, and just wanted to share that with you as well as we move forward. So at this point in time, I'd like to step back and Seth, turn things over to you. It's your show, sir.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate all of that. So let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes. Just to give you a little bit of background, I am the program manager for the ELAP and LIP programs, and I work in Nebraska. I am originally from out in Banner County in western Nebraska. Most people identify Scottsbluff if they're from that area, and I grew up about 30 miles to the south of there. So I'm very familiar with what's going on as far as the snow. I have family that lives in the northwest corner of Nebraska, into Wyoming, into Colorado, that all farm and ranch. So I will say that a lot of what's going on right now, I'm very familiar with it. And we try, as Jamie said, to make the programs fit those different areas of disaster that are, maybe a little bit outside of our normal drought related loss coverage, and just trying to make sure that we cover as much as possible. As I said, I do manage the LIP program as well, the Livestock Indemnity Program. You can see a listing of the disaster assistance programs, basically the toolkit that we have available at FSA, including LIP and ELAP, which I run. And then there's the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program, which is the NAP program. And in my previous life, I worked in the NAP portion of USDA at the national level. And I did that for about 12 years before I moved over to ELAP and LIP. There's also an emergency conservation program. We're working to enhance that to provide more coverage, but sometimes those enhancements take a little bit more time. We would like to see the ECP program be used, further on to help us out in some of these situations that have arose that maybe aren't covered. As the deputy said, closing the gaps is what we're trying to do. So the emergency conservation program may help us do some of that. He also mentioned the livestock forage disaster program for LFP. Obviously, that's a drought coverage program for forage loss, and very important in our toolkit for disaster assistance for drought. And of course, the disaster designations, anytime there's a secretary designation or a presidential designation, that can affect availability for some different programs that we have in the scope of FSA. So Kelsey, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So one of the biggest things that we have is the FSA notice of loss requirements. It's important for you to remember that you do have to report your losses to FSA, to the county offices for LIP, NAP, ELAP, and TAP. Any notice of loss can be filed with USDA Farm Service Agency. You can do that via phone, or email, fax if you still have that, or schedule an office visit. Just make a phone call and we can set something up for you to do that. You want to go back to that previous slide? There's a few things I wanted to hit on real quick. If you'll notice, if you're a honeybee producer, that is one that is a little bit different. There is a 15-day requirement from when your loss is apparent to file for ELAP. For ELAP for livestock, you do have 30 days. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that. That 30-day loss situation for livestock has been extended in 2023. When we go through the slides, we'll explain how that's happened and where it comes into play. Under LIP, there still is a 30-day requirement to file your notice of loss, but recall that that is from when your loss is first apparent. So one of the items that we wanted to make sure that you're aware of, if you lost livestock in 2022 due to any blizzards or any other eligible weather event via winter storm, and you do not find them until 2023, or you never find them, but you know that they were, that maybe you lost calves that were born in 2022 and they were lost due to that weather event. We're working to be able to extend that for LIP so you can file that based off of when you know that those animals are lost. So for 2023, LIP still does have a 30-day requirement, but for 2022, we are making exceptions, and we'll have that out in policy to help support those of you who have had those tremendous blizzards and are unable to find your animals. The NAP program has two different notice of loss requirements. One of them is for 72-hour crops. Obviously, those are typically hand harvested crops. You have 72 hours to file a notice of loss on those. I doubt that many of you are probably affected by that due to the blizzard, but if there are any of you that are, there is a 72-hour rule for those hand harvested crops. Otherwise, NAP has a 15-day policy for filing a notice of loss, and it needs to be 15 days from when the loss is apparent. Okay, next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the 2022 Livestock Indemnity Program. Why are we still discussing 2022? Well, for a lot of producers out there, the snowstorms really have never ceased. They started back at toward the end of 2022, and they've just kept piling on. And in a lot of cases, we get phone calls and emails that the animals, simply have not been found. So what we're going to discuss a little bit about is the 2022 LIP program and what it covers. Next slide. Of course, it provides benefit to livestock and contract growers for livestock deaths in excess of normal mortality. Those do have to be caused by an eligible disaster event, eligible weather typically, or an eligible disease or attack by animals reintroduced to the wild by the federal government. They are also protected by federal law, meaning that if you're, we know that wolves are a protected species in a lot of states. So if your animals are attacked by wolves because they're federally protected, they would be eligible for the LIP program. And we know that there's also instances of avian predators that attack and kill, tiny lambs and different things like that. If those birds are federally protected, you're eligible for the LIP program for those as well. Next slide, please. So there are some record keeping requirements for the LIP program. One of the things that's really important that we establish is a beginning inventory record. Without a beginning inventory record, it's really difficult for us to provide coverage under the LIP program. Even if you do suffer from death losses, without that beginning inventory, we really can't calculate a payment until we know what your inventory is before the disaster event occurred. So it's important that you're able to provide us with those inventory records. Right now, the requirement is that they be acceptable to the FSA County Committee. We can include all kinds of different inventory records. They can be, verifiable is great. reliable is good too. But we will take whatever inventory records we can get, and we will work with you to identify and establish a beginning inventory. The proof of death loss documentation is a little more difficult. Typically we like to have pictures, dated pictures of proof of loss of death. However, we know in a lot of instances, especially due to the blizzard, that isn't always accessible. The requirement for death loss documentation for predator or aviation attacks is a little more cumbersome. We do have to have documentation in order to do that. But for death loss that was identified due to the blizzards, if you can provide a beginning inventory and some type of calving record, noting that the calves were born, and if you lost, mama cows, bulls, or calves that you have an inventory record on, we can work with you to identify those that would be eligible under the LIP program. Unfortunately, LIP does not cover instances of deaths to the mama cow when they have not calved. That baby isn't eligible until it hits the ground. So if you lost animals that were still pregnant, unfortunately, the LIP requirement is that those babies have to be on the ground in order to be eligible. Any type of purchase and sales records are great information. That, of course, would be verifiable information. So that would be something that would be easy for the county community to accept. As you can read on through here, the calving records, a lot of times including the date of birth, that is hugely helpful. If you just write down that I had 44 calves, out of 50 cows, that oftentimes we don't necessarily consider that acceptable. You do have to include some type of birth date or recording, if you've got tag records or anything like that, those are always generally acceptable. The biggest thing is just having dates, identifying when those calves were born. Obviously, pregnancy test records completed by a third party are very valuable as well. If we know that you had, that we had pregnant cows out there and that they calved out, and you aren't able to identify, those calves because they're lost due to a blizzard or some type, and then they were drug away by a coyote or something like that, and you never find that animal. If you have pregnancy test records, we can definitely use that to help identify what your beginning inventory may be for those calves that are on the ground. Grower contracts are great for evidence. Proof of normal mortality documentation, of course, is always beneficial too. If you suffer from normal mortality, there is a normal mortality requirement under the LIP program. If you suffer from normal mortality and are able to show FSA that you had that, that will help you meet the criteria to increase the payment for your animals that died due to an eligible event. You do have to get over that normal mortality criteria before you'll start to get a LIP payment. If you have normal mortality on your own, you're able to prove that helps you get over that particular piece that's required under the LIP program. Next slide, please. As you can see, here's tons of different record keeping examples, as I spoke to before. Acceptable beginning inventory records. All of those listed on the left are easy ones. Acceptable proof of death records, those are also considered acceptable records. So if you have any questions about what is acceptable, obviously, if it fits into this particular listing, it would easily make that list or easily meet that eligibility. If it's not on this list, we can always work with you and discuss it with the county office. And if the county committee requires more information, they can always put that request out back to you to help us get as much of your records as we can that would be considered acceptable. The one thing I would tell you that we, and I'll get into this a little bit later, we plan on extending the sign up for 2022 out through June 2nd. That would allow you to be able to provide those records for these 2022 losses all the way out until June 2nd. We know there's going to be some situations where you're unable to find some animals. So what we're wanting to do is give you some opportunity based off of that first snowstorm, that happened in 2022, the first big one that was followed up in a lot of instances by a second big one. And then of course, the third, maybe even a fourth in 2023, extending that sign up for 2022. It'll help you get over that normal mortality requirement in 2022 if we can identify that those animals were lost due to the 2022 storms. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to move on to the ELAP, or the Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybee, and Farm-Raised Fish coverage of the program. ELAP covers losses that aren't currently covered under LFP or LIP, meaning that any drought loss really for grazing isn't covered under ELAP. That would be covered under LFP, and any livestock losses would be covered under LIP for the most part, if they're not honeybee or farm-raised fish losses. So those aren't considered livestock. The livestock portion of the ELAP program is for livestock feed, transportation, livestock transportation, and water transportation. And I'm going to move into that a little bit more on the next slide and kind of give you an idea of how that works and how that may be beneficial to you, especially those of you that suffered due to the snowstorms that have recently happened. So the snow removal and feed purchased above normal. Not a lot of people are aware that ELAP can help out with that, with snow removal and feed purchased. There is a requirement that if you want to be reimbursed for snow removal under the ELAP program, that you do purchase feed above normal. What does that mean? Well, that just means that you purchase feed outside of what you would normally have purchased the prior 2 years. And so if you had to purchase any type of feed, you know, and we base it off of your date, right? So if you purchase feed, let's say you had to purchase additional feed on March 15th. If you didn't purchase that type of feed the year before on March 15th or the year before that, that would be considered feed purchased above normal. And you just have to turn in the receipts for that feed purchased and certify that you didn't purchase feed on those dates the prior year. And then that would help make you eligible for snow removal. It's a two-pronged approach. The other prong is, and I didn't list it in this because it's typically used for hurricanes and tornadoes, but if you lose feed due to either of those and you have the feed destroyed, that also would make you eligible for the feed cost to administer that feed. Like with a hurricane, if you had to helicopter the feed in, we can help cover that cost if that feed's been destroyed, and the only way you could get to them is by dropping it through a helicopter. That's another way that we can cover that. But for this purpose, I'm just strictly going to talk about snow removal because that's really what's going on in the western part of the US right now. So with that, the feed, like I said before, that second bullet, the feed can be purchased anytime after the disaster event until the following year's grazing period begins. For some of you that your grazing period begins on April 15th, this means that you would have to purchase that feed prior to tomorrow. I believe today is the 13th. And so if we did that, and your grazing season starts on the 15th, that feed would have to be purchased prior to the 15th, meaning tomorrow is the last day that you can purchase that feed above normal. If you purchase feed anytime after that disaster event up until the grazing period begins, that would be eligible, and it would make you eligible for snow removal as well. That feed purchase above normal triggers the eligibility for ELAP for the reimbursement of snow removal due to blizzards. And that would have to be based off of verifiable or reliable data acceptable to the county committee. Typically, if you're purchasing feed, if you've got any type of receipt for that, that would be considered the evidence that would be needed in order to be eligible. Next slide, please, Kelsey. So any amount that you receive for any other federal programs for snow removal would have to be deducted through the ELAP payment. Right now, there really isn't anything through the ECP program that covers snow removal, but that is currently being reviewed. And if that does happen, then ECP would, if you decided to take ECP money for snow removal, that would of course be deducted from any ELAP payment. They consider that double dipping, and well, that would not be eligible. But right now, you don't need to worry about that unless you're some type of state agency relief was given, or any other federal relief was given for snow removal. Of course, that would be deducted from any ELAP payment that you might receive. Payments for additional feed above normal and the cost of removing the snow during the blizzard, it's held up to basically the litmus test is how many animal units that you actually had to feed all the way up until 150 days of grazing. So the cap on that is whatever the cost of 150 days of grazing would be for that animal. That would be the limit of the amount of feed purchase that we can cover outside of normal and the cost of removing snow. There is a cap on how much producers can be paid, but if you are qualified for underserved, you could be eligible for up to 90% of the national payment factor under ELAP. If you do not qualify for underserved producers, then it would be limited to 60% of the cost for under the ELAP program. Next slide, please. One of the other things that has happened in the last 2 years, ELAP has added livestock and feed and forage hauling. Previously, it only covered water hauling for livestock, but now that we have these other 2 options, they are dependent upon drought designations in the state and the county that they're in for feed and forage transportation. They require 2 different designations, or well, 2. And obviously, the D3 and D4 qualify as the same. When I say that, there's actually 3 designations, but 2 of them are under the same boat. So under the U.S. Drought Monitor, you're required to be in a D2 for 8 consecutive weeks, or D3 and D4 is used as an automatic qualifier. For states that do not have 365-day grazing, obviously we would have a little bit of a hole in that period because your grazing dates stop in the fall and then pick up again typically in the spring. And for those that do not have the 365-day grazing, ELAP actually covers for livestock feed and forage hauling and livestock hauling over that time frame based off of losses in the prior year. So for those of you that your livestock, your grazing dates begin April 15th, you can haul, if you had a drought designation and a qualifying drought designation in 2022, you can haul livestock or feed or forage outside of normal all the way up until that April 14th date, and it would qualify based off of 2022 drought. Now, I'm going to say that again because I know it can get to be confusing, but if you suffered from one of those qualifying drought events in 2022, and you're not in a 365-day grazing county, you're eligible for that hauling all the way up to the beginning of the next year, meaning this year, 2023, the grazing dates that happen. And for most cases, either April 15th or May 1st is pretty typical of the northern states of when those grazing periods occur. So if you are curious about that, please reach out to your local county offices. For 2023, we have removed the drought designation requirement for you to file that within 30 days. As I noted in that slide before, for livestock, you do have a 30-day requirement to file the notice of loss. For 2023, that 30-day requirement for livestock has been removed, and you can file all the way back to when the drought qualifies. So if you're not sure of when you qualified and you contact your county office, and let's say that your county, you're already in a D3 or a D4 and you're automatically qualified, if you wait until later on in the year, you can still file that notice of loss going back to when that drought designation occurs. And prior to that in 2022, we had only allowed you to go back 30 days to file that notice of loss. For producers that have not already filed a 2022 application for ELAP, we did extend the deadline for that out until June 2nd of this year. So if you have not filed for ELAP yet, you can still do so for 2022. And you can file back for whenever the loss was apparent to you at that point in time in 2022. And this is a recent change that we put out there. County offices just got that information yesterday. And if they have questions, you can refer to the national notice ELAP 15. That's going to have the designation descriptions for 2022 that extended. If you've already filed for ELAP for 2022 and you're not sure if you did it correctly, you can always contact your county office. But if you've already filed, you've probably already visited with them, and they've explained to you how late you can file that back. And there won't be any updates for those of you that have already signed up. You've already signed up, you're good to go. For those that have 365-day grazing, your clock started over on January 1st. So for 2022, you can still go in and file, but if your clock's already started over, and you can also look into 2023 designations as well. So right now, if you haven't filed, you're open for 2022. If you have already filed for 2022, obviously 2023 has started for a lot of you, and you can already file for that. And of course, if you still are hauling due to 2022 drought and you want to come in and file in 2023, you're still available to do that. So I know it can get confusing because we have different eligibility in different states depending on what your grazing season is, but our county offices should be more than willing to help you. And if they can't answer your questions, or if they're unsure about something, they can reach out to their state offices, because their state offices have been trained on this and are going to be trained on it some more today, actually this afternoon, to be able to help you out. So we definitely want to make sure that we're getting everybody who's eligible in. If you're not sure, still come in and file a notice of loss. The worst case scenario is you're not eligible and you would be denied. But if you don't file a notice of loss or an application for payment, you're never going to get anything. So please do come in and file a notice of loss and explain to your county offices that we have told you to file the notice of loss. At least let us act on that, and we can figure out whether or not you're eligible down the road. Okay. All right, next slide, please. As I've already mentioned, and I'm sorry I've skipped ahead on some of these slides, but that's just because I start getting my mind rolling and I think about 1,000 things a minute, and I talk fast, so I apologize for that. But the drought designations are dependent on your state and county for the feed and forage transportation and for the water transportation as well. You do have to hit the qualifying droughts, as we talked about, the D2 for 8 weeks, the D3 or the D4 is automatic qualifiers. Again, for those states that don't have the 365-day grazing, prior year drought qualification works up until the beginning of the season's date. The main reason that I have this slide out here is that I want you to make sure that once you're qualified in your county, you're qualified through the end of the year of that grazing period, if you're 365 days. If you're not a 365-day grazing county and you qualify during the grazing season, that qualifies you all the way up until the next year's grazing season begins. So if you file later on in the year, let's say that you qualify, but you don't end up hauling above normal for ELAP for livestock feed or forage, or you have to haul your cattle somewhere else due to the drought, and you didn't have to do that until later in the year, you're qualified for that from the date that you hit that designation all the way through the end of the year. The other thing that I wanted to hit on before we go to the next slide, for those of you that are currently in the blizzard situations that have tremendous amounts of snow, if you have to haul beyond 25 miles and haul that you don't normally have to do, if you're already qualified under the drought designation, you can still turn that in for the blizzard hauling as well. It's not limited to drought. Once you're qualified under drought, you're qualified under every event that occurs for the rest of the year. So any hauling that you may have that's above normal, above 25 miles, is eligible even for the blizzard designation. You don't have to have a designation for blizzard if you're already qualified under drought. If you're in a county that was not qualified for drought and you did suffer the blizzard due to the blizzard and had to haul above 25 miles to get feed or forage, go in and file that application with your county office. You're not immediately eligible, but if you do file that notice of loss with the county office, they can submit that to the state committee in your state, and they can submit that onto the deputy administrator, and we can review that and determine eligibility based off of the disaster event. So please, if you have not qualified under the drought, that does not mean that we can't pay you anything. We just have to know what the event is. We have to send that up to our state office, and then they'll send that to DAFB, and we'll review that and make a determination then. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, in 2023, livestock hauling will cover the drought qualified for producers that haul their livestock further than 25 local miles, and they'll cover them if they haul back to this is a change for 2023, excuse me. This is for livestock hauling. If you qualify under that drought designation and you haul your livestock somewhere else to find feed for grazing, you can haul them there and you would qualify for the livestock transportation. In 2022, we did not cover to haul those livestock back. But if you haul a pot of cattle somewhere and you have to haul them back, now we're accepting in 2023 for you to haul those livestock back, you can turn in that mileage as well. So that's a big significant change in 2023. We had heard from a lot of producers that wondered why we didn't cover that. We had to make sure that it was eligible under our policy, and starting in 2023, we know that it is, and you are eligible to relocate your livestock in 2023. This isn't for 2022, unfortunately, but in 2023, we will cover if those livestock are hauled to a different location. We'll cover that hauling back. Okay. One of the questions that we get quite a bit is that livestock being hauled to a feedlot, are they eligible under the livestock transportation program? We have clarified that livestock can be hauled to a feedlot. Originally, that was not the case. We've clarified that, and they can be hauled to a feedlot. Excuse me for a second. Thank you. The one thing that we do have to identify is that producers must have risk in their grazing acres in order to qualify for eligible hauling due to drought. And I think I saw somebody put a question in the chat. If your animals are in a feedlot and they're not being grazed, they would not qualify for the livestock transportation portion. Next slide, please. Under the water hauling under ELAP, water hauling is eligible for up to 150 days, but the 150 days is the limit. The payment rate is set at 7 cents a gallon. And so it's not a mileage rate. You don't have to turn in mileage. You have to turn in the amount of gallons that you're transporting. In order to be eligible for the water hauling, producers have to qualify, obviously, for the drought designation, as we spoke about before. But you also must not have been hauling water prior to that disaster event, meaning that you wouldn't normally be hauling water to your animals. You do have to have a permanent water source that they normally wouldn't be required to transport water to, meaning that there should be some type of watering service already on the grazing land that the animals are on, in order to qualify for that water hauling as well. Next slide, please. As you can see, we've already changed the deadline for 2022 calendar year losses and extended that for the emergency livestock, honeybee, and farm-raised fish. We also are going to extend that deadline for the LIP program. We don't have a notice out about that, but that is coming right away. So both LIP and ELAP are going to be extended out to June 2nd. For those producers that didn't already haul or didn't already file for livestock, that deadline's already been extended. What we're doing is we're extending the deadline out for those producers that have not been able to find their animals all the way to June 2nd as well, because we know that there's situations where animals are just not going to be found until the snow recedes or is melted. And so we want to make sure that we are assisting producers if they can't find their animals based off that 2022 blizzard. And we'll allow them to come in and provide us that data all the way up until June 2nd for the LIP program as well. ELAP is basically wide open for anybody that has not filed for an ELAP application in 2023. LIP will be open for people that have not filed, and it'll also be open for producers that have losses in 2022 that are not apparent to them until later in 2023. Obviously, the LFP program, the deadline to request assistance for that was January 30th of 2023. For those producers that suffer for drought in 2023, that deadline will be January 30th of 2024. And next slide, please. We've put in here a couple of different links to work with FSA for new and existing customers to apply for benefits. We want you to contact your local FSA center. If you're not sure where your local FSA service center is, you can go to farmers.gov service center locator, and it will provide you the opportunity to look up where your service center might be if you've never worked with FSA before. If you have worked with FSA before, of course, you probably already know where your service center is located. For outreach assistance, there's also outreach portion under here under FSA.USDA.gov under outreach. Provides a lot of different informational material for the different disasters that are available. And should you need to visit that, you should be able to find different things, fact sheets and other information that's provided to help you get through the program and understand what the eligible portions of each program are. Next slide, please. We've also put all the USDA online links in here. They're relatively easy to get to, the FSA.USDA.gov, farmers.gov, USDA.gov/OTR. If you want to sign up for our e-newsletter, you can go to FSA.USDA.gov and subscribe, or as we said before, locate your local FSA center office for assistance from that previous link. And with that, I don't have any more slides to review. And Jamie, was there anything that I missed that you want to make sure that we hit on before we start answering questions?
Seth, not anything that you missed, but I just wondered, knowing that this is going to be a change and you are also meeting with states and county offices later to follow up on these key policy enhancements and clarifications. I just know that we have a lot of folks on the line who don't have that 365-day grazing period. I'm just thinking it's helpful sometimes to point it out so that they can articulate when they apply for assistance in the county office that for transportation assistance in the 2023 calendar year, the 2023 ELAP application may actually provide assistance or encompass transportation assistance for a drought trigger associated with 2022 for those first few months of the calendar year in 2023. And then again, a secondary drought trigger if one should occur in the 2023 grazing season. So while we keep referring to the 2022 drought, there, as Seth indicated, there is that carryover trigger into the 2023 calendar year, but we treat it as a 2023 loss for ELAP calculation purposes.
And that's a great point, Jamie. One other thing to keep in mind, if you do suffer, and you're not in that 365-day grazing period and you do suffer a loss and you file for that payment based off of 2022 drought, you will have to file two different notices of loss. You'll file one for 2022, and then you'll file again in 2023 as soon as you're eligible, or if you're already eligible, you can file it right away. The other thing to keep in mind too, when you file your application and you file your notice of loss, and let's say that you're already eligible and you turn in a month's worth of loads that you hauled of cattle or feed, either one, you can file an application for payment specifically on those loads through that date. And then you can come back in later on and bring in more loads and fill out the application again, or at least enhance the application and update it, and we can pay you for those loads further on. So keep that in mind. Just because you are hauling loads right now, you can provide that data to the county office, and if you end up hauling more later, you can provide that data later on, and we'll update your payment amount.
We have a couple of questions. Is it okay if I start to kick them over your way, Seth and Jamie?
That'd be great.
Great. The first one that came in says, are we able to put on the ELAP application dates August of 2022 through April of 2023 and list all feed purchases and the like at one time? Or are these disaster dates, do they need to be more specific when submitting an ELAP application?
Okay, so in a situation like that, you would have two different applications. Anything prior to the first of the calendar year would go to a 2022 application. And then anything after that would be counted for 2023. And so you would file two different applications in that situation. And just, if you bring in your information and just say, I need to file for 2022 drought loss in 2022, that's going to be one application. And then if you've got continued hauling based off that drought in 2022, you'll file another notice of loss in 2023 to get paid, even though the drought occurred in 2022, like Jamie just mentioned. That flip over to the calendar year it does require us to do a different notice of loss. Part of the reason that is because of funding. The funding is divided up by different years. And so if you have a loss in 2023, that has to come out of 2023 funding. And if you're hauling in 2023 versus if you're hauling in 2022, that comes out of a different pile of money. And so we need to make sure that we have applications for both years.
Thank you for that. Can you provide more context to what qualifies in the above normal feed and forage purchases?
So for snow removal specifically, and that's really what we're talking about, the qualification is that you can turn in any type of feed purchased above normal. And it could happen at any time, but it has to be due to the weather event, the snow covering the ground, right? And you can turn that in, and then that makes you eligible for snow removal as well. So, you know, if you do suffer from the blizzard and you're unable to, you know, your cows can't graze, you have to purchase feed in order to supplement them until the snow's gone. You can turn that in and we can take that information and apply it to our application.
Okay. Another question that came in through the Q&A. What if you filed for 2022, but you were told you could only get coverage for trucking mileage cost and not the actual feed expense?
So the fee, I guess I guess I would have to know what the feed expense was from, because the qualification, we really don't pay for the feed necessarily unless there's an event that you know, like that's outside of drought, right? So if you're hauling for feed due to drought, those payments, you have to qualify under the LFP program. That's basically what the LFP program is for, the hay that you purchase. ELAP program covers the hay that is hauled, and it doesn't cover due to drought. It doesn't cover the hay purchased. So I guess in that instance, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, and maybe you can clarify, but those would be two separate pieces. The piece that I'm specifically talking about under the feed purchased above normal applies to the snow, where you're unable to get to your animals. The drought coverage is handled under the LFP program. So if you qualify for LFP, that would pay you for the, you know, the lost forage. And that's kind of how the two programs work. ELAP can't cover the same things that LFP covers. And for us to haul, you have to qualify for drought. So the hauling is the piece that ELAP covers, and the actual forage loss that helps pay for that feed purchased is under the LFP program.
And if the feed purchased above normal is specific to the snow removal, and they weren't allowed to include that on their ELAP application in 22?
They should be able to include that under their ELAP application.
Okay.
If that's a situation that you know, if you're unsure, go back to your county office, provide them with that information. If they still have questions, just we will work with them. Just explain to them that you were on this call, and that if they are unsure of what is eligible, they can contact their state office and we can get it straightened out. Now, I will tell you that hopefully after today, a lot of those questions that you're asking will be straightened out, and the county offices will understand that they can accept that if you had to purchase feed above normal for the snow, that's eligible under the ELAP program.
Thank you for that. Another question specific to hauling. There's a couple of questions that have come in actually. One is that I was told hauling cattle to the feedlot did not qualify, even though this was something I did not normally do. Can you provide a little more background on the eligibility as it relates to hauling to feedlots?
Sure. Well, I'm not sure when you were told that. You know, we did have a clarification last year. The program was new. Originally, we were told when we were reviewing our policy in the regulation that it wouldn't be eligible to go to a feedlot, but we had clarification and updated our policy later on last year in 2022 that you could haul your livestock to a feedlot. Originally, that wasn't going to be covered. That was a change. So if you did haul your animals to a feedlot and you were told that you couldn't apply, I would recommend that we go back to your county office and provide them with any of your information for livestock hauling, and ask them again, do I qualify for this? Because if you haven't already applied for it under ELAP, we've extended that deadline all the way out to June 2nd. Take it back in there and tell them that you want to apply for that particular piece of the livestock hauling.
Perfect. An additional trucking question. FSA provided assistance with trucking to feed. Is that feed cost allowable if it is cost that is above normal practice as a producer? And what about the trucking costs to get the animals back home from the feed?
Okay. I'm not sure I understand the first part of that question, but the second part is starting in 2023 to bring the livestock home, that is covered. We were able to get that coverage in 2023. Unfortunately, we don't have that available in 2022.
So if the animals are being brought home in 2023 due to a 2022 departure from home, that trucking home does not qualify. Is that what you're saying? Just to make sure.
Right. In 2022, if they were hauled, yeah, we don't cover that. If they're hauled back, but
Okay.
in 2023, they will be.
Okay. And I think the beginning part of that question is specific to if animals were trucked to feed, but trucking to feed is not a normal practice. It was a practice that had to be pursued due to the winter. Is that feed cost associated with where you trucked them to something that could be considered an allowable cost?
Yep. So the way we have worked that is that if you're already eligible due to the drought, that if you had to haul your livestock more than 25 miles, that it would be eligible. And
Okay.
so I guess I would need to know, in your situation, is your county already eligible for drought loss? We wouldn't typically cover that, but if you did have to haul due to the blizzard, I think what I would suggest is that you go in and tell them you want to apply, explain what your situation is. They'll have to send that to the state committee and get a recommendation to DAFB. But if you do have that specific information, if you want to email me at seth.cross@usda.gov, I can contact your county office and we can work with the state office and see what we can do for you on that.
Thank you for that. Another feed related question is specific to magnesium tubs. The producer says they're essential to prevent looming realities of grass tetany on lush pasture growth. Don't normally worry about this as my calving pasture has a stand of old grass that balances their diet to prevent grass tetany, but this year, due to the drought last year and the snowfall amounts flattening any remaining stand of old growth I have, I'm having to supplement an increased amount of magnesium to my cattle. Would these tubs be an allowable expense through ELAP?
Right now, they would not qualify. They would have to be due to an eligible disaster event. As far as I guess trying to think of a way we could cover that. Currently, I don't have any coverage for ELAP for that particular question.
Okay. Is that a question that they should elevate through their county office as well, perhaps?
Yeah, I would contact your county office. I think there's probably a little bit more to that we maybe need to hash out and maybe discuss it with your county office and see if we can get to the bottom of everything. But as far as the not being able to graze because of grass tetany, right now we currently don't have any coverage for that under ELAP.
Okay. Question specific to the grazing period dates. How or can the grazing period dates be adjusted due to weather? A lot of us are still covered up in snow. Those who have melted off are about 30 days away from being able to actually graze it. In order to be good conservationists and stewards to land, we need to continue feeding. So if there's still producers trying to buy feed, it's going to be too late to qualify for the program due to the grazing dates.
Well, the grazing dates are established for program purposes based usually off of your university providing us the information of what your normal grazing periods are. If you're continuing to haul based off of the fact that that you're under snow, what I would suggest is that contact your county office, Tell them that you're still under snow and that you're having to haul. If you're hauling over 25 miles, and you don't normally haul that type of feed, we can look and see if we can make that eligible. It'd have to be a request that's sent through the state committee again. So I know that there's probably going to need to be some flexibility with that, but we just contact your county office, explain what the situation is, and explain that on this call that we discussed that this type of submission would have to go through your state committee for eligibility. And then they would send that to the deputy administrator. The reason being we have to go that route is that we do have, we have chain of command that we have to follow, and we have to document anytime we step outside of what's currently eligible. Right now, that wouldn't currently be eligible. So for us to make that, make that determination on eligibility, we would have to, go through our normal process. So I would encourage you to contact your county office and tell them that we talked about it over this call and that you want to file a notice of loss for the snow on the ground, the blizzard that occurred, and that you were already been eligible up until the grazing period started, but with the grazing period restarting, that we need to review eligibility. It may be a situation too, if you've already, if you're already qualified under drought, that you may not need to worry about it, but we'll definitely take a look at it.
Okay. I've got one more feed question and then a couple of other non-related questions,
Okay.
unrelated to feed. Due to the drought, hay ground was not big enough to put up, so a producer paid rent on hay ground and crop land in another location. Would the feed they got off of that location qualify? I'm guessing that they're asking if the cost associated with renting the land would be eligible for some sort of assistance through some of the disaster programs.
So it has to be purchased or produced feed or feedstuffs, meaning harvested. Just renting other grass does not qualify under ELAP. I think, is that the question? Or they rented grass because
I believe they rented land to put hay up on. So it did technically get harvested, but they did the harvesting by renting the land and then traveling to it to put the hay crop up on.
So harvested feed, it doesn't matter whether you harvest it or somebody else harvests it. If it's over 25 miles, it is eligible. If you're in a drought qualified, county, of course.
Okay.
But if you had to rent another pasture, that wouldn't be covered under ELAP.
Okay. Is the cost of hauling that hay to their home eligible if it's over 25 miles?
If it's not a normal haul, yes.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Is winter kill on your crop covered under NAP?
No, it is not. Winter kill is not covered under the NAP program.
Thank you. And a question specific to a lot of producers in my area have had an abnormal number of bulls test infertile, in which the veterinarians are saying the animals' testicles froze during the extreme weather. So now a lot of producers are trying to buy bulls and rent bulls at an abnormal rate. Is there any help coming for those producers that are dealing with this problem?
Well, we do under the LIP program, if you do sell those bulls due to a weather-related loss or damage, we do cover a certain portion of that. So if you have a damaged bull and you have a veterinarian qualify that they were damaged due to the significant weather event, you can file an application and turn that information in if you sell them. We don't have anything, if you hang on to them, unfortunately, we don't have anything that would qualify you. But if you do sell them and they're damaged, you can turn that in under LIP and they may be eligible.
What are they eligible? What's the cost associated?
Well, so if they're sold at a lesser cost, basically, they're eligible under LIP for that, they can bring in their receipt, and if they have to sell them for less than what the average market value is for that year, we can cover the difference depending on what the cost of the sale is.
Okay.
So, if you had to sell one for, $300 or something like that, and you bring that in because it was damaged, there is some compensation under LIP.
A follow-up question to that coming in: what would be the date you would have to sell the bull by in order for this to qualify?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a two-pronged situation, right? You have to
Mhm.
suffer from a claimed weather event. And you'll have to have that third party certified that, that the animal was affected by that weather event. And then you can't get any compensation without selling the animal. So until you sell the bull, it wouldn't be eligible.
So if this producer is speaking to weather events that took place this winter,
Mhm.
they're now getting their bulls pulled from their herd, and they were going to go test them
Right.
to have them certified if they're fertile or infertile. And then they were to sell the animal. I think the question is alluding to, does this sale have to happen prior to April 15th in order for the lip to be
So for
a possibility?
lips based off a calendar year, it has nothing to do with the grazing dates. ELAP is the one that is based off of grazing dates. So lip, I mean, the only qualification is that you have 30 days from when the loss is first apparent, right? So if you get the bull tested and you don't sell it, I mean, technically, if you're already aware of it, you really only have 30 days from when the loss is first apparent. So if you get it tested, I mean, and you don't sell it within that 30 days, technically it would be, it would be a late filed notice of loss. And so, I mean, you really have 30 days. If there's a situation where there's no market for it, I mean, you could request relief from your county committee. But I would suggest filing it as soon as possible, because if you get much past the 30 days, it's going to be hard for them to provide relief if you're just hanging on to that animal.
And can you speak a little bit to what that process looks like when submitting a late notice of loss as a
Well, it's
producer?
just like any other notice of loss. You just come in and file the notice of loss, but your date, you have to fill out the notice of loss and you have to identify the date the loss is first apparent. So
Mhm.
for this bull, I mean, if that happened in December, right? And you have the veterinarian come out now and he says, oh, this has happened because of this, and he'll sign off on it. And that's basically when you know that the loss is apparent at that point in time, right? So if the
Mhm.
loss is apparent then and you wait and you don't sell that bull for 90 days, 120 days, really, that if you don't file that notice of loss and you don't sell that animal within that 30-day period, after that 30-day period, really the loss, the date the loss is apparent is over that 30-day window. So anything after that would have to require relief, and that would be up to the county committee to provide.
Thank you. I think that that's helpful for a lot of producers who are heading into the breeding season,
Sure.
assessing their bull power right now, recognizing that the notice of loss can take place when the bull is tested rather than back when the qualifying weather event happened.
Right. So yes, and just remember, there's two pieces to that, right?
Mhm.
You have to get a veterinarian to sign off on it that it was due to the qualifying weather event, and you have to sell the animal in order to get any compensation.
Right. We are winding down with the questions that have been submitted through the Q&A and the chat feature. I want to make sure and keep those options open just a minute or two longer. If anybody has any remaining questions that they would like to ask, now would be a great time to ask them. I want to make sure and take time though to express our gratitude for both Seth and Jamie's time, not only today on this webinar, but I know that these programs and refining these programs, getting these programs communicated out to stakeholders is really what you live and breathe day in and day out. And we sure appreciate all of the hard work that you do for us in the positions that you fulfill for the Farm Service Agency. I will go ahead and end the recording here. I'm not seeing any more questions come in. Those of you that have joined, we will send out a link to the recording so that you can revisit. Oh, okay, just kidding. There's one more question. Brought cattle home from feed and was denied by county committee or by county office to be paid to bring them home. I have a denial letter. What's the appropriate pathway forward in that scenario?
So if you hauled them to feed in 2022, they wouldn't be eligible for the
Okay.
hauling back. If that happens in 2023, obviously it would be eligible. But I'm just
So it
assuming.
sounds that's a new development for 2023 where
Right.
hauling home from feed can be covered. That's not
Right.
something that can be covered in the 2022 year.
Right. That was a policy enhancement that was approved for 2023.
Okay. All right.
Kelsey, before we
Yes.
close the call, there's just one item I would just like to add, and I know that Seth hit on this, and I know, Kelsey, that in engagement with IEC, this is something that you all emphasize and support. But similar to the last question that was raised, what do I do if I receive a denial letter? Again, we always want to remind participants that in the event that there's any adverse determination that's provided in writing, that it is certainly the participant's opportunity to pursue due process. And while due process may seem overwhelming, it may refer to, or we refer to it as an appeals process. Oftentimes the engagements are very informal with both a county and state committee. There is also a disinterested third party that involves the National Appeals Division that provides oversight and review of participant requests for reconsideration and appeal. But to a point that Seth made previously, the only way that due process can be started is if a formal determination has been rendered. And we can't emphasize enough that we have great folks on the ground that are there to serve you as producers. And sometimes we have conversations and participants may elect not to apply or feel they shouldn't submit a notice of loss or an application for assistance. And again, we just certainly want to remind and encourage all participants of the importance of going through that application process. That ensures that you have an application on file, that it will be reviewed and considered. And we as an agency learn things each and every day that allow us to enhance and or inform policy and processes. And oftentimes that arises as a result of due process. So I do know that's something that IAC has helped advise on before. And Kelsey, I believe you all have been able to support participants in reviewing those adverse determination letters. But again, that is just something from FSA's perspective that we do want to lift and remind each and every one of you that we can only review and process applications that are on file. So again, certainly that is something we want you to pursue. And in addition to that, anytime you go into a county office, you can also request a receipt for service to document that engagement with FSA staff. Again, so that you do have record of that engagement and interaction and the guidance that's been provided by the FSA county office. So our goal is to provide you with robust customer service. And again, certainly as part of that, sometimes we provide information that may be misconstrued or misleading. And again, our goal is to document those interactions to help address potential vulnerabilities or miscommunication that may have been part of that process. So again, Kelsey, I apologize. I just think it's important that we highlight that before we close today.
Absolutely. I think that that's really important information that producers should know. Also, I encourage you to sign up outside of those sign up periods. If there isn't producers coming in submitting applications outside of the sign up periods, then there's no trigger to folks in the offices to say, obviously this program wasn't accessed during the initial period. What can we do? What can the cooperators with the IEC do to increase outreach to you all to make sure to get the applications in within those sign up periods? I did drop our website, indianag.org, in the chat. IEC has a team of folks that are happy to work with you through navigating the sign up or even the appeals process for any of these programs. And we love to hear feedback on the ground on how these processes are going for you so that we can continue to advocate for increased access to programming for you all. So please reach out if you have any questions. We will follow up with the link to this webinar for all of those folks that are registered. And again, thank you, Jamie and Seth, for all that you've offered to today's conversation and to the ongoing service through these programs.